get straight into the fun stuff.
So I'll just tell jokes till we're ready to start.
You got any good ones?
There's a professor who takes a leave of absence from teaching to go on a speaking circuit, and he hires a driver to drive him from speaking spot to the next speaking spot. And so for about 6 months, this driver drives the professor around. He sits in the back of the room while the professor gives a speech. And after this 6-month period, the driver says to the professor, "Hey, I've been listening to you for 6 months. I bet you I can give this speech just as good as you can." And so the professor says, give it a shot. And so they switch clothes, and the driver gets out of the chauffeur's uniform. He gets into the professor's gear, and the professor sits in the chauffeur's uniform at the back of the room, and the driver gives the speech almost perfectly, except he finishes just a few minutes early, and somebody raises their hand and asks a question. And the driver says, "That question is so dumb, I'm going to let my driver answer it."
Right.
So if we were in a room together, everybody would be cackling and falling over laughing, but it's really a lesson in asking questions. And so during our time today, you guys should all feel free to ask away. The format to do that is as Simon will tell you during the housekeeping, but questions are highly encouraged. We're here for an information exchange. It's always better when we have the audience participating, and I promise that I won't make fun of you if your questions are dumb.
Oh man. So by the way, guys, that person just talking now is Brad. You can see his name there. He's our VP of partnerships. I was going to introduce him formally, but yeah, he's gone and introduced himself. Yeah, he's been working. Has he been in messaging for 20 years or something? Like older than I am.
Yeah,
longer than I've been.
I mean, I started working in messaging when I was 7. So yeah, it's pretty good.
Awesome. Brad is also got the honor of dubious honor of being one of the co-inventors, or he was involved in the invention of shortcode, which we're going to be talking about today. And alongside Brad, we have the much older and much more experienced Philip Kajawa. I'll let him introduce himself.
Pleasure to meet you folks. I'm part of the solution engineering team.
Awesome. Phil's got a lot of experience working firsthand with our customers on messaging, so I'm super excited to have him on this discussion. So I'm just, can you guys both see my screen? I'll just make sure that it's all displaying correctly. And awesome. And then as for me, I am your host, Simon Babiste. I am the product marketing manager for our messaging suite. So I'll, without any further ado, get into what we're going to talk about today. So we'll do a quick introduction from myself, then Brad will get into the state of the messaging industry and what's been happening there, and also talk about toll-free, and I'm super excited to hear from him about shortcode as well. Philip will get into alphanumeric, which is an increasingly popular topic, and finally touch on sort of our approach and our view of all things messaging. And then we will have time for Q&A. I can see some of you are already posting stuff in the chat there. It seems like both of those are comments rather than questions. But yes, hello and welcome to you as well. So we'll start things off with a quick poll. I think our webinar behind the scenes person is going to put that poll up on the screen. Should show up. You guys seeing a poll? I'm not.
I see the slide.
Yeah, I see the slide. I'm just not seeing the poll. There should be a poll on the screen right now. Oh, no, my polls option has disappeared, weirdly enough. Ah, here we go. Perfect. Sorry about the delay there. So the first poll is, which number types do you use to send more than 1,000 messages per month? It could be just long code or 10 DLC as a subset of that, toll-free, short code, or alphanumeric. I'll be really interested. I think I know what the results are going to be, but let's see if I'm surprised. So we'll just wait another second or two, and then we'll take the result. Which should be showing. All right. Okay, almost as I expected. So it looks like most about everybody has used 10DLC or is using it. Some of you are trying out toll-free, are using toll-free and shortcode, which is awesome. And no one's on alphanumeric, which personally makes me very sad. I'm biased. It's my favorite number type at the moment. It's definitely not the only one you can use. And that brings us into why we're doing this webinar. So as I expected, most about everybody, a very large number of people have used or do use 10DLC. But what I find we find folks often overlook is that there's three good alternatives to this, and they're often even better than 10DLC in certain scenarios, but they come with their own set of requirements and processes for working with them. And that's what we're going to be covering today. In many ways, it's a follow-on from our previous SMS webinar. I think that was about a month or so ago that I co-hosted, and we focused that one primarily on 10DLC. So here we have another poll, because I just love throwing polls at people. Let's see if this one works. So this one, similar, pick more than one if it applies. What are your primary use cases for SMS and MMS? Is it marketing and outreach, which, by the way, I'd include politics if you're if you're doing political messaging, or is it more conversational, like a two-way thing between a support agent and a customer, two-factor authentication, some type of notifications, or something else? And again, you can pick more than one option, and I'll give you a couple more moments to fill that out. Let's see what we got. Okay, so this is a bit of a different makeup in the audience in terms of what I had on the last session. So I think in that session, we saw a huge number of people doing notifications and a few less doing marketing. But here I see a lot of two-way conversations, which is fantastic because we're going to be talking about at least one number type, which I personally think is really great for two-way messaging. And I'll just close that off my screen and go on to the next slide. And now I am going to pass back to Brad, and he's going to give you a general commentary on the state of the messaging space. Now, Brad, do you want me to drive the slides and you just tell me when to switch, or do you want me to hand over? I can drive.
Yeah, I'm going to be super busy just transferring knowledge to this group that I won't have any energy to transfer the slides. So if you could take care of that, that'd be great.
Cool.
Thank you. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome and thank you for taking time to hear us out here. We're going to attempt to kind of talk about the ecosystem. We're going to drill down and talk about the different use cases around the different messaging types. And we really want to start with why. And so this slide is intending to kind of tee up the why. Messaging, since its inception, was generally a person texting another person. And over time, like Simon said, we built the shortcode program in the US to allow enterprises to leverage messaging as well. And so for the better part of 20 years, shortcodes have been around, and over that time, people have figured out how to text enable non-wireless numbers, so businesses could text enable their landline or voice over IP, or VoIP phone numbers can be text enabled. And so you saw this deployment of a lot of messaging from not necessarily the greatest sources. And so a lot of bad actors were coming around and creating messaging programs that were either spamming subscribers, giving unwanted texts, giving too many texts, lots of nefarious behavior that created the need from the wireless operators to put in significant amount of filtering or rules changes that prohibit that behavior. So it went from the wild, wild west, which was free for all, to kind of where we are today, which is a very, very regulated from the carrier's perspective position. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why that happened, and we're going to talk about the recent notice of proposed rulemaking from the Federal Communications Commission. In September, they launched or announced this potential rulemaking. And if you understand how the FCC works, they'll put out this NPRM, which is basically saying, hey, we're thinking about making some rules changes. And what do you guys think? And so they put out the NPRM, and then people have the ability to comment. So the comment period recently closed, and now people are viewing the comments, and then there's reply comments where people can do that. And then the FCC comes back together and decides, is there something here to move forward? And so they're looking at robotexting as cracking down. If you're following the telecommunications space much, you're probably familiar with the rules changes around voice and robocalling. There's been a lot of work done from the operators to kind of identify good calls. So you might even see this on your mobile device firsthand, where it'll say spam likely, or the caller ID of the person will show up if you have a third-party app or something like that. And that's happening because carriers are having to attest or sign up for those calls, saying this is a good call, or this is Simon calling or Brad calling, and you get to get that information kind of pushed along with the voice call. In the texting world, they're looking to do the same thing, but they just don't have the same technology. So the FCC's asked the industry, how would you do it? And everybody's kind of weighing in right now. In addition to the filtering systems that the carriers are using, there's a bunch of registration events happening. So on all messaging types now, there is a requirement to do some kind of registration, whether it's called a short code program brief or a 10DLC registration or a toll-free verification. There's some way that you have to identify who is sending the messages. It's a very common phrase in the world today. It's called know your customer, or KYC. And so they're interested in understanding the know your customer aspects of this ecosystem, which shows up somewhat problematic a lot of times, because you're looking at ways that your competitors are getting access to your customers' information. So there's definitely lots of challenge with the idea of giving your customers information or things like that. So more to come there, but wanted to tee up kind of why we're here in this world, and it really settles on people getting unwanted messages. So if we could do away with unwanted messages, great. The problem is unwanted is a subjective term. So so if we go to the next slide, I'll start detailing about what we're talking about on a more granular basis. So we get into the different message types, and then we're going to get into different use cases, and we're going to drill down in each of these message types. So you kind of look at it from a perspective. In the US, we primarily settle on 3 of the 4 types. And like I said, short code's been around for a long time. Toll-free messaging was a thing that happened, I gotta say, close to 10 years ago. The carriers decided they would enable text messaging on toll-free numbers, and so there was an ability to create a new channel. The path or the gateway in which toll-free messages flow is the same as the short code gateway. So if you think about the wireless carriers networks, there's really 2 messaging channels. That's short code and toll-free, and long code. Local long code, same thing as 10DLC. So if you see that term local long code or 10DLC, that's the same thing. There used to be a distinction between A to P, application to peer or business to consumer, and consumer to consumer or P to P. There's less so the case these days. The carriers basically treat everything as A to P, and on a very rare occasion, they'll give an exemption for P to P traffic, but most everything is A to P. So we're going to talk about things being from a business. Long codes are your regular phone number. So things that are attractive when you're looking at the different use cases, you want to think about throughput, you want to think about your use case, you want to think about cost, and then you want to think about consumer perception. So a lot of people will say, I'd like a local long code because the person's going to think that it's coming from a locale that's close to them. Like if I have a Washington, D.C. 202 area code and I get a message from a 202 number, I'm going to assume that that's a local thing. We all know that's not the case, but this is some of the thinking that people have when they're choosing the different message type. Toll-free, a lot of people don't even know what a toll-free number is. But back in the day, long distance was a thing, right? So you had to pay extra to call a long distance, and businesses created these 800 numbers to allow for consumers to reach them for free. So they wouldn't have to pay the long distance. And so the toll free meant no charge. Toll free, it's not really a thing on the messaging side because everybody pretty much has unlimited plans. So you're talking about the idea that it's a business. And so there's a benefit to the number being kind of in people's mind associated with the business, but more and more as the generations get younger, they don't know what a toll-free number is. So we have that. The key distinction that you want to think about from a toll-free and a long code is that the toll-free, because it's plumbed into the same gateway as a short code, the carriers turn on delivery receipts. And so that tells you that it got delivered to the handset. On a short code, they wanted to be able to tell the businesses that the message got delivered, so they turn on delivery receipts. So when toll-free came around, it too sees delivery receipts, where on the long code side, you don't get handset delivery receipts. You only get a gateway delivery receipt. So you don't really know that the message got delivered. And so there's some key distinctions when you start to go in, and let's go to the next slide, please. We'll talk about, toll-free a little bit more. So like I said, there's the history was toll-free numbers were sometimes text enabled, but then this formal program got put into place. It's been about 10 years, and it's a thing that's available like where toll-free numbers are. So in the US and Canada, that's where we had toll-free. Those numbers you can text enable a toll-free number, and generally will work in the North American areas. But again, the key, so we're going to use this car analogy a few times in this presentation. And so we're looking at this as like, hopefully people are taking this well, like the Mustang is pretty sweet sports car. So you want to look at it as like, there's a sophisticated level, the throughput and the way that you send on toll-free is closer to short codes than it is to long codes. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but it's a pretty good option for you if you're looking at how fast you're sending, how much you're sending. So velocity and volume are key. So if we go to the next slide, we'll drill down a little bit more about why we're going to do toll-free texting. So the benefits are pretty simple. The pricing straightforward. You get more and more the messaging is a message. So the price is pretty similar. There's no need for a separate registration like you do on 10Digi. You have to go to the campaign registry and register, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It's very, very simple. And then, like I said, you get these handset delivery receipts. That's I think one of the most important aspects of this. If you're paying a little bit more for the message, but it got through. It doesn't matter how much you save if the message doesn't get delivered. It doesn't matter. So you got to focus on delivery and the like. When you think about the consumer, you're recognizing the number as a business. It's for old people like me, and you can engage. The other key piece on the 800 is around the escalation to a voice call. So unlike short codes, you can actually voice enable your numbers already enabled for calling. So if the text messaging escalates into the need for a phone call, they can do that on the same line, as opposed to having to text a number on a short code, having that consumer hopefully be able to click on it or copy it. It's very cumbersome. So we talk about some of the benefits. Again, volume and velocity are pretty good once you get verified. So I want to talk about that. And let's go to the next slide and talk about what might not be good about toll-free. So the things that are, go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, before we do, sorry to interrupt your wonderful flow there. I have a question and a comment. The comment is about questions, which is, I noticed quite a few of you joined in the last few moments. So for those of you who weren't here for the introduction, we are going to have Q&A at the end, but absolutely you can post as many questions as you want. I know for me, in my experience, toll-free is a topic that we get a ton of questions about. So feel free to chuck those in the question box. I think it's at the bottom of your screen, or the top, depending on your UI, but it's a speech box. It says Q&A, and we'll try and cover that as we go along or at the end. The second thing I was going to ask Brad, which is Just something I get asked a lot. Is it free for an end customer to text a toll-free number? Like if I'm receiving a message, toll-free number, and I'm in, say, Washington, from 1-800, Brad text, and they reply for free.
Yeah, so it's a great question. The answer technically is no. It's not free, but the other answer is pretty much everybody has unlimited plans. I don't know a carrier these days that charges per message. So you're paying for all of your messaging as your bill, but if you broke it down, you could find a fraction of a penny or something. I don't know what the breakdown is, but there's no what used to be a thing was kind of billing on behalf of, or free to end user was the technical term for a message that the business took care of it. So back in the day when I paid $10 a month for messaging or 25 cents a message in the early days of messaging, there were opportunities for businesses to remove that cost to the consumer and make it free. But nowadays it's kind of moot because people all have unlimited plans.
Cool.
Okay, moving on to why not toll-free. This is always interesting to try to poke some holes at things. There's a lot of reasons why you would look at toll-free. Some of the reasons why you wouldn't is if you have an international use case or you want to be more globally focused. There's throughput limits. Like I said, if you don't register or verify your traffic, there's very pedestrian levels that you have to use. And then there's a lot more of this kind of monitoring and filtering on the toll-free side for different kind of content restrictions. So they'll be much more restrictive of the different use cases, and we'll drill down into those in just a minute. But those are some of the things that if you're not in the U.S. or Canada and you want to use this number and you're likely going to have to go with a different number. Still, you could use the same use case, same content, same campaigns, but have to look at a different sender if you're going internationally. So let's go to the next slide and talk about the use cases or content that isn't allowed. And then, and so this is very much, you should be thinking about this as across the board, not just with toll-free messaging, but specifically in toll-free, they are hunting for these types of traffic. Cannabis is one of the ones we spend a ton of time trying to figure out how to make work, but it's fundamentally prohibited by the operators across the board. But in toll-free, they are very, very diligent about hunting for cannabis traffic. So the cannabis senders get really creative and they figure out ways to not use anything that says cannabis, and they still oftentimes get caught. Alcohol, tobacco, there's this acronym in the wireless world called SHAFT, which stands for sex, hate, alcohol, firearms, and tobacco. So basically anything that's SHAFT related is pretty prohibited, and then will likely get blocked. But when you look at these financial services or get rich quick schemes, really this is a byproduct of bad actors. And so generally people don't want people collecting their debts, right? So if you don't want a message to say, hey, you owe us money, even if it's legit debt collection. So what happens is debt collectors go out and they text you, and they're perfectly in the right to text you, but then the consumer says, I don't want this, and they complain to the carrier or reply stop, and those factors start to create blocking. And so the carriers have learned over the years that if we just don't allow this, it creates less headaches for the carriers. They don't have as many contact center, consumers calling in and complaining. So be mindful of these different use cases or different types of messaging. This is going to get you in hot water. If you start sending this, it's likely going to get blocked. We go on to the next slide. Some of the things that you could just intuitively think are really good use cases on toll-free are just two-factor authentication, meaning I'm going to send you a password, a code for you to enter into the website that you're on, the speed and throughput being what it is in verified traffic, you can get those alerts pretty quickly. Any type of questions around whether you're having fraud, reminders for your appointment, things like that, that you have any kind of high volume, school closings or different things. If you're looking from a finance standpoint, if you're interacting with your bank and they want to give you an account balance or something, generally larger institutions are going to be using short codes for these types of services. But like I said before, you can text enable your toll-free number, and then you're able to add that messaging capability in addition to the call center support. So there's a lot of really, really good use cases, a lot of good, gigantic brands, like the payment company Square, for example. Every time you get a cup of coffee, you get a receipt on a toll-free number. So lots of really good use cases. Political messaging, like Simon said earlier, is another big user of toll-free. And so if you have questions around, is my use case the right one? Generally, if it's a quality use case and it's, driving good consumer behavior, meaning you're not getting a lot of complaints, you're probably good to use toll-free. Next slide, please. So now we're going to switch gears to short codes. So short codes, we're using this Ferrari because it's really probably the highest performing, and this is going to be subjective. If you're a McLaren guy or a Lamborghini, then you're not going to like it, but we just chose this pretty arbitrarily. Don't read into it too much. Just want to conjure up this image of very high performance sports car. And again, no slight on Ford, just a little bit higher performance. Short code's been around for a long, long time. And the maturity of that platform gives it a lot of quality expectation setting, right? So it's going to work. It's a very cumbersome process to start a short code. So the process of getting provision on a short code could take 4 to 6 weeks. But once you're going on a short code, you're pretty good. You're kind of free to go on and on. I don't know. There you go. So the short code program in the U.S., Simon said, was built about 20 years ago, and the cost to rent a short code, because you don't own the short code, you lease the short code. Every month you have to pay, depending on if you pick the number. So we call it a vanity phone number or a randomly assigned number. It's either $500 or $1,000. And then some service providers, we have fees on top to manage the code or operational fees on top of that. But the key about the short code is it's not unlimited volume, but it's very, very high throughput. So you're able to look at campaigns where you're sending, we have customers that send tens of millions of messages a day, and the short code performs very, very well. They give you handset delivery receipts and the velocity and volume. So if you're can afford the monthly fee, you're pretty good. Reasons why you wouldn't want to use a short code, same thing, money. It's expensive. A number might be $5, $10, but short code is $500 or $1,000. There's no calling, right? You can't turn it into a voice call, like I said before. So you're generally stuck with that conversation, or you have to get the consumer to leave that conversation and use a different phone number. The support for the short codes is really limited to US or Canada only, not really and Canada. So when you go, because the US short code program and there's a Canadian short code program, you have to go provision the code in both countries. So now you're paying double for that code, because registering in the US doesn't give you Canada. You have to go get Canada too. So now you're looking at an even more expensive proposition to run the traffic in both places, but those codes only work in the US or Canada. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, this partially answers a question someone posted, which was, can the same short code be supported across multiple countries? No.
So you can go get the same short code if you're lucky and it's available. You can register both, but if your code is Pepsi and someone else has Pepsi, then you're out of luck. It's just like a URL or a domain name. If it's taken, you got to go find the person that's got it. And so being the guy that set the price on short codes 20 years ago, we came up with the idea. We didn't want 3 Freds in the shed squatting on all the numbers because there's a very limited resource. So we said we were going to make it $500 or $1,000. And we said, if you can't commit to, $6,000 or $12,000 a year for this, then how serious are you about, your brand or marketing to your consumers? So that was kind of little background on why that number is what it is.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide, please.
Yeah. On that note, by the way, the 500 to 1,000, because I realize some people might be confused looking at the screen there. Yeah, like is it typically, you said 500 to 1,000. So do we ever see, for example, people paying 2,000 a month, like if they have a vanity short code or something like that?
So where the distinction lies is companies like Telnyx charge fees on top to make the services work. So they're administration fees. So if you go to the short code registry, if you go to the website usshortcodes.com, you could sign up and get your own short code. If Telnyx does it, then we have fees on administration fees on top. And I don't know if the number is 1,000 or 2,000 or what have you. The actual number to rent a short code is $500 for a random code or $1,000 just to get the code. That doesn't mean you get to provision it or you get to run it and manage it or anything other than you just, it's like, think about going to, GoDaddy.com and creating a URL. That doesn't mean you're going to have a website. That doesn't mean it's going to work. Or it's not going to be hosted anywhere. You just simply are registering the name or the number in this case, and that's it. So then you got to go take it to a company like Telnyx and then make it work.
Yeah. And can someone, if they already have a short code, can they bring it over?
Yeah, of course. It's very, very easy process. Depending on who your current provider is, it could, we could see transfers in a matter of hours or days instead of weeks. And so it's a very seamless process to run a short code transfer.
All right. I think we might be coming to the end of Brad's section. I realize we might not have had a why short code texting. I don't know if there's anything else we should add for people. I think we covered it all in terms of why short code is what it's for. And
yeah, I wanted to leave as much time for Philip and questions and answers as possible. Right. So I know we tried to cover a whole bunch in a short period of time. Right. It's a lot to digest, but any questions or anything, please don't be shy.
Yeah. Cool. We're just doing our last poll, which is more of a quiz. Which of these countries does not support alphanumeric? I'm going to see if you folks have been paying attention. This is a single choice. Unfortunately, there's not a prize at the end, but maybe Brad's going to buy you a free short code. I don't know. But in any case, yeah, which of these countries does not support alphanumeric sender ID? So I'll just give you another second to answer that one. And then let's just take the result. Okay, yep. So unfortunately, some of you haven't been paying attention because I see a lot of people put Afghanistan, the United Kingdom, and Dominican Republic. Only a very small amount put Canada, which is the correct answer. So Canada and the United States +1 does not support alphanumeric. Incidentally, my home country, New Zealand, also doesn't support alphanumeric, which makes me very sad. But yeah, all those other countries, you can use alphanumeric. You can register an alphanumeric sender ID there. So yeah, Philip is going to take us into alphanumeric, the code that most of you aren't using, but hopefully you'll think about it.
Hopefully we'll see a lot more adoption with it after I present my section here.
Awesome.
Folks, pleasure to meet you. I hope your day is going well. So first up, we're going to have a brief introduction around alphanumeric, and then we're going to talk about some of the features and functionality, some of the drawbacks, some of the benefits. So a little bit of history. The first SMS message was sent over the Vodafone GSM network in the United Kingdom using a personal computer in 1993, the beginning of 1993. Early adoption, many European carriers allowed the ability to change the SMS settings so that you could override the sender ID. This was early adoption, and the early adoption supported the alphanumeric. It's known as alphanumeric sender ID as it's known today. US and Canada carriers, they're SMSC, so the SMS centers that actually manage the switching and the routing of SMS messages, didn't adopt this ability to change the sender IDs, mainly because of fraud prevention. They didn't want, they wanted a single sender assigned to a single handset, and they didn't want the ability to change the sender ID because of fraud. Today, alphanumeric sender IDs are supported in 190 countries. Its adoption is quite high on a global scale due to its flexibility, as kind of Brad mentioned. Its support for various features like handset delivery receipts, notifying the sender that the message is received. And so with that, I'm going to talk about why you would use alphanumeric sender IDs. All right, so let's go through the brand benefits first, and then we'll go through the consumer benefits. High throughput. Similar to using a dedicated shortcode, using an alphanumeric sender ID, you get high throughput, up to 60,000 messages a minute using Telnyx by default. The standard as it's defined itself has no documented limit. So a lot of mobile operators can actually far exceed that limit. But again, Telnyx employs a limit just to stay compliant with most carriers. Generally, there's no registration costs. That said, some countries do require you to register an alphanumeric sender ID directly with the mobile operator. India is a great example of that. Carriers could change the policy in the future so that they will charge for registration costs, but for registration, you do require the ability, for countries like India, for example, you do have to register directly with mobile operators. True handset delivery. So handset delivery receipts notifying the sender that the message is received. Alphanumeric sender IDs do support that. In countries where alphanumeric sender ID isn't supported, Telnyx will handle the routing and adjustment to a different sender ID automatically. So again, it's very flexible, and Telnyx makes it very easy to use from a brand consumer. Now let's go into the consumer benefits. It's highly recognizable. You can use a combination of letters and numbers up to between 6 to 11 characters, depending on the country. If you're looking at countries like the UK, you can use up to 11 characters. If you are sending messages to India, then you can use only a maximum of 6 characters. You can register a sender ID, and you can use only a maximum of 6 characters. So it's very flexible, and it's very recognizable because it's a combination of letters and numbers. So you can use your own brand, your own company brand, or an alternative version of that, or shortened version of your brand name to send those messages out. A single ID can be used to send to multiple countries. So again, my advice here is to keep to the smaller half or the lower end of the limit of 6 characters if you're sending globally. But if you're sending to like UK, Australia, or a subset of European countries, then you can go up to 11 characters and just keep that same sender ID across all those countries. And again, it could be received around the world. Great. Next slide. So drawbacks for the brand. It's not supported in the US and Canada, as Simon kind of alluded to in the poll. Some countries do require pre-registration. India is a great example of that. And in some situations, pre-registration needs to be done with the mobile operators directly. India is an example of that. You have to actually, you as the person that's registering for the sender ID, you have to actually reach out to the different mobile operators in India, and you have to ask them to register the alphanumeric sender ID on your behalf. We will help you and assist you with all the forms that you need to fill out for that. But again, it would be you reaching out to the mobile operators in that case. In some countries like New Zealand, we can do the registration on your behalf. There's no two-way messaging with alphanumeric sender ID. It's all outbound. You can only send outbound messages. You can't receive messages. So again, it's customized, right? You can send an alphanumeric sender ID. You can send it, and you don't have to necessarily do registration in a lot of countries. So there's no way to reply to it. It's not supported in US and Canada, as we mentioned, and you can't reply. So we've mentioned that as well.
Yeah.
Simon, next slide.
Yeah, before I actually have a very relevant question that's just come in.
Sure.
See if you can do this one. So an alphanumeric can be sent from Australia. Will it be delivered in the US?
No, you won't. It won't be delivered to the US.
Yeah. There's kind of 2 parts to that question of sending it from Australia. I think it depends. If you do it through the Telnyx API, I think we would kind of try and take care of the details. Yeah. We are, by the way, I work closely with our product lead on this, and we are looking at some ways to make alphanumeric even easier, because we recognize that it's becoming a really interesting space. So I hope that answers that question. Let's go to the next slide.
All right, so we're going to actually go next into the Telnyx APIs and how you can use our different messaging products: shortcode, toll-free verification, and alphanumeric sending. So Simon, next slide, please. All right, so in this section, we're going to be talking about how you can send a message using a toll-free phone number or a dedicated shortcode number. There's three main parameters that you need to provide in the API: the text, the from, and the to. The text is the text body. The from is the verified toll-free number. We'll talk about toll-free verification in a little bit. Or the verified shortcode number, the number that we've gone through the campaign brief, we've gone through the verification step. Now you can use the dedicated shortcode or toll-free number, and you can input it into the API. And the to is where you're sending the message to, the destination phone number. So it's a very simple API, just requires 3 fields, and it's very easy to use. We have documentation on this. All right, so toll-free verification. Telnyx offers APIs and portal features that allow you to submit toll-free verification. Now, the why here is a lot of operators recently, with the increase of a lot of A2P traffic, application to person traffic, a lot of mobile operators required the ability for senders to verify their identity. They need to identify the use case. They need to identify why are they sending these messages. They need to identify who's sending these messages. So a lot of these operators said, well, we need to come up with a system, not just for long code, which is 10DLC, but also for toll-free. So with toll-free, they created a toll-free verification system. Up until recently, a lot of this has been manual. So it's been a manual, there's a manual form that you have to fill out. You have to submit it to the mobile operators. Each mobile operator would have to verify the use case, and then you'd be able to send using that toll-free number. Telnyx makes that a little bit easier because we have both an API that allows you to submit the toll-free verification, and we have that same functionality that you have with the API in the portal, which I'll go through in a little bit here.
One fun thing to add here that I learned today from our product lead, who has also been working on this API. Currently, and this may change, many of the carriers and aggregators treat a number that has been requested to be verified. So you've put in a request and it's pending. They treat that as verified, even though it's not yet. In other words, if you put in a request through our portal to verify the number and you start sending traffic, until you're actually your verification is rejected, you can actually send traffic. So it actually does, even if you are waiting a little while to get your verification request completed, assuming that you've done it all properly, yeah, for the moment you can actually get straight into it. So that's something that we think is pretty cool.
Great, Simon, thanks. We're actually going to go through that right now. So there's 3 main categories for toll-free verification, verification statuses. There's verified, there's pending verification, and then there's restricted, also known as unverified. We'll start from the bottom up. So restricted or unverified, any number that has not been submitted for verification or has been identified as is identified as restricted. So numbers in restricted class have the highest amount of filtering applied to the traffic. Numbers will automatically get shut off in this state if any spam or unwanted traffic is detected. So again, if you haven't submitted a verification and you are sending some traffic that is questionable by the mobile operators, that's part of the shaft category, sex, hate, tobacco, firearms. Then it will get shut down automatically if the carriers deem it as spam. Pending verification or in progress, waiting for vendor is another term for this in the Telnyx portal. Upon submission of the numbers, the numbers will be placed into a pending verification state. These numbers are opened up for sending with a medium amount of spam filtering applied to the traffic. If a block does happen, it will happen to the individual content or an automatic block on the phone number. but it's at a medium level. So there's a little bit less filtering. There's no restriction on how fast you can send in the pending state, as Simon kind of alluded to. Once you've submitted that verification, you can start sending away at your heart's content at the same speed as a fully verified toll-free number. The sender will stay in the state until a decision is made about their verification status. The last status that we need to talk about is verified. Traffic in the verified state means that it's gone through the verification process and it's been approved. Numbers in this state will have very little amount of spam filtering, and the spam filtering will only be blocked on the content itself. There will be no automatic block on the number itself. This protects consumers from unwanted traffic, but it also protects the enterprises that are sending these messages, so that it's not affecting all of your phone numbers or sending to all of your recipients in your list. So you won't be shut down without a formal review. Great. So these next two slides that I have listed out here just talk about some of the fields that are required and the descriptions for those fields. For the most part, you don't necessarily have to memorize these fields or the descriptions of these fields. I just put this here just for your own knowledge. Our APIs, as well as our portal features, are going to have form validation. So if you make a mistake on any of these form field values, or you make a mistake on the portal form that we've put on our when you log into the Telnyx portal, it will actually come back with an error saying, hey, this field value is incorrect, please change it. Or you fat finger a phone number, you put in one less digit than you're supposed to, it will tell you put in the wrong toll-free number. It's not the right format. So a lot of this validation is already done using our APIs and our portal. Simon, next slide. Perfect. Lastly, let's talk about alphanumeric sender ID and how you can send using an alphanumeric sender ID. Similar to toll-free and dedicated shortcodes, there's a text value, a from value, and a to value. The text value is the message body. The from should be the alphanumeric sender ID, depending on where you're sending to, the destination country that you're sending to. It can be anywhere between 6 to 11 characters long. And the last parameter that you need, you need the to, where you're sending the message to, as well as the message profile ID. Because there's no concept of having a phone number attached to your account, like there is with toll-free or dedicated shortcode, with an alphanumeric sender ID, because it's dynamic, we need to provide some kind of connection to a messaging profile on the Telnyx platform. So that's why you need to provide the message profile ID, so that we can send you the webhook when you send an outbound message, or you're sending an outbound message using an alphanumeric sender ID. If you're logging into the Telnyx portal, the top right corner of the messaging profile, you'll see the messaging profile ID. As it's kind of listed out here, there's a screenshot of that. It's very simple to send using an alphanumeric sender ID. You just need to provide the message profile ID, the from, the to, and the text. Simon, take it away.
Cool. We are now fast approaching Q&A. Quick obligatory plug for us, Telnyx, you're the sponsors of today, sponsoring ourselves. We are still getting really good ratings for our users with regard to our messaging platform on the software reviews aggregator site, g2.com. We operate now and have been for some time. I just wanted to make sure it was a consistent trend on the scale of billions of messages sent. So if you're wondering, can I do massive volumes like the kind that Brad was talking about earlier? The short answer is absolutely you can. We have an expert support team who everyone loves. There's no extra charge for working with them. I think the funniest review I saw about them was it's almost as if these people never sleep. The costs, we focus a lot on optimizing your account and removing, in terms of your configuration, just through all this knowledge of details and nuances around messaging, and trying to minimize middlemen. And that kind of brings me to the last point. With messaging, specifically at Telnyx, we really pride ourselves, and I think the toll-free verification API is a great example of that. We really pride ourselves on, just dealing with all of these little details so that all you have to think about is trying to send a message. And if it doesn't work or you have an issue, we'll try and tell you why it's not working so that you can, not have to think too much or fill out, like have to think about all these different fields. For example, when you're putting a request, we'll just make sure that you put it in. And we handle a lot of our other stuff similarly. So this brings us along to Q&A. And I'm going to get right into it because I have one question that's been bugging me for a while since we were talking about toll-free. Can we use toll-free for several use cases or several SMS content, but with the same use case? So which one of you wants to have a crack at that?
So it's, yeah, so it's a complicated question because you'd have to kind of understand what use case you're talking about. But generally speaking, you want to think about the brand, and the brand can do a bunch of things with the number. So you're not really restricted when you talk about the use case in particular. You just want to have compliant traffic, and that's representing that brand. So the brand could send two-factor authentication and marketing on the same code. That's not a limiting factor. It just has to be compliant traffic. So you want to think about it from that perspective, like, is it good traffic or not? And that brand, it's associated with the one brand. So you likely can't send a bunch of marketing stuff for a bunch of brands on one number. It needs to be focused on a single brand, and then you could do a bunch of things related to that brand.
Cool. And just a friendly reminder, because I know some people joined even later on than the second wave. There was like a third wave. If you want to post a question, there's a little Q&A widget. It'll either be at the top or the bottom of your Zoom window, and you can post questions in there, and I will throw them at the talented gentleman on this panel. So the next one I've got. What's the recommended path for using a Telnyx number for personal text messaging as opposed to a business use case? Can I, as a developer, send messages to friends with a, oh, I love this question. Can I, as a developer, send messages to friends with a 10 DLC number without registering a brand? Who wants to have a go at 10 DLC? I kind of feel like I should throw that at Phil.
Yeah, great question. You can. It's going to be unregistered. You can send messages through using a long code number in the US or Canada. With that being said, you will see a little bit more filtering, and you will see higher pass-through fees. The carriers want you to have your registered traffic. If you don't register, you're subject to higher fees from the mobile operators because it is unregistered and they have to apply additional filtering on that message. But other than that, if you're okay with the fact that your message might get filtered or there's a higher amount of filtering, technically speaking, yes, you can send messages without registering a brand or a campaign.
Yep. And just to add a little to that question, having seen some of this stuff happen within the industry about a month or so ago, and Brad touched on it in his general commentary earlier, there was actually a bit of a crackdown on people using business, like what were business use cases, supposed to be business text messages, but they were flagging it as P2P, person to person. And then, yeah, when the carriers suddenly said, hey, like this is business traffic, it kind of forced some folks to react really quickly. And something we said in the last webinar about number registration and use cases, it always pays to try and set everything up correctly. A lot of folks, and I'm not talking about this particular situation, but it's I've seen it with others. A lot of folks try to get around it, and just remember, like, messaging's not encrypted. Carriers can see your traffic. Just it's best to try and follow the rules as much, or follow the correct path as much as possible. And also it actually helps increase your deliverability if you're registered. So it's like a green flag, if you will, that lets you through. I have another question. Some of my messages, I'm just this is a Telnyx customer. Some of my messages are being blocked and nobody can tell me why. I was told I would have to contact the carrier, but I'm not provided the actual phone number to call. My numbers do A to P and PCP. I think he might mean P2P for reminders and customer service.
Great question. Let's we could take that one offline, Gary. If you want to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to go through your specific use case and see if we can help assist you either registering the long code number through via 10DLC or suggesting maybe a different channel like toll free, which is a lot easier to use, in my opinion.
Cool. Next one. Is there a list or matrix which shows which countries support 10DLC, i.e. trying to send 10DLC numbers from USA and UK to Brazil? The sending 10DLC numbers are not passed correctly.
Some countries, like New Zealand and India and Brazil, what happens is if you use an A2P number, a US A2P 10DLC number, it's actually going to get overwritten into a dedicated shortcode that gets passed along to the handset in that country. If you have a use case, a P2P use case, conversational only, then we can actually support something called a US P2P long code phone number that will allow you to send messages internationally. And what happens with a P2P US phone number, it will allow you to actually have that same phone number show up on the handset within a different country like New Zealand, India, Brazil, etc., without actually being overwritten by the terminating carrier.
Cool. I have another one about alphanumeric. This is one of my favorite questions that I get asked a lot. If alphanumeric does not allow replies, how do I let people unsubscribe? I don't want to get in trouble.
Great question. So there's two main ways that you can unsubscribe customers from alphanumeric sender ID. The first way is to, in the message body that you're sending when you're using alphanumeric sender ID, is to provide a long code, either a US or a UK long code number that people can reply on in the message body. The second and the preferred method is to put a link in the message body that would allow customers to unsubscribe. And then you would create a backend service that would look at all the people that have replied or clicked on that link, and then you would create a form that would allow users to input their phone number and then unsubscribe from messaging through your service. So either using a link in the message body or using a long code number that does support two-way messaging, either US, UK, Canada, Australia. Those are examples of numbers that do support two-way messaging on a long code number.
Yeah. Sounds like this one might be from someone who already knows you, Philip. I just want clarification as to why SMS sending using toll-free has varying results. Sometimes it works, most of the time it doesn't. Even a new number that is not verified yet would sometimes work. It's a challenge for us providing better service to our customer with varying results, although I know it's mostly the carrier. I'm not sure if that's I think it's a question. Yeah.
In terms of toll-free, I think we've mentioned this in the presentation. So there's three versions of the verification status. If it's an unverified number, you could still send from it. There's no limit on the fact that you can't send from that number, but you are subject to a high amount of filtering if it's unverified. If you have a fully verified toll-free number, there should be very little filtering. So if you're seeing a large amount of filtering, contact myself directly, and then we can work through some of your technical hurdles, maybe go through your use case, make sure that it's properly verified downstream, but with the mobile operators, or look at the messaging itself that you're sending and compare that to the actual verification that you've submitted for toll-free number on the toll-free number.
Cool. We're approaching time. I've got one more. How do we contact you, Philip? I'm going to answer that question in a second myself. I'm going to show you how to contact Philip. It's very technical. But before that, I have one last question, which I'm going to chuck at Brad. Short code sets. It's actually two different questions, but I'm just going to mash them together. Short code seems stupidly expensive. Does anyone actually use it? And the other related question, can I send MMS from a short code?
So I don't disagree with you about the cost. It's all relative. If your brand is reaching your consumers effectively via short code and your conversions or whatever you're trying to do is working, then it's a very inexpensive path to reach to use the short code. When you compare it to email or you compare it to other marketing examples, it doesn't show up as a very, very expensive thing. But when you compare it to the cost of a toll-free number, the registration on the short code is very different. Yes, you can send MMS. MMS is a little bit different of an animal, so it's limited the amount of payload you can have. So think about an MMS as a text message with an attachment, and that attachment is limited in size. So you want to be mindful of keeping the content of that attachment to be, something less than a megabyte of data. A lot of carriers will limit you to 500 kilobytes. So you just have to be careful. You're sending a picture or a short video, but you can't send a movie.
Cool. Look, I think we've hit time. We're actually going over time now. So if you do want to talk to Philip, that's his email address right there. You can also email Brad. Or you can go on telnyx.com/contact us and talk to the legendary support folks that I mentioned, the same ones who people asked if they even sleep. They do, apparently. I haven't actually seen them sleep. That would probably be kind of weird, I guess. I think that's everything, unless Philip or Brad, do you guys have anything to add?